Welcome to the National World War II Museum's podcast series, Service on Celluloid. This podcast is brought to you through the generous support of the Albert and Ethel Hertzstein Charitable Foundation. This is our mini-episode where I will hone in on some of the finer points from last week's main episode. My name is Seth Paradin, historian and digital content manager here at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, and today I'll be continuing our discussion on the 2008 film Valkyrie. Valkyrie focuses on the July 20th, 1944 plot to kill Adolf Hitler, plan carried out by one German Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg at Hitler's seemingly impregnable Eastern Front headquarters in East Prussia in what is today Poland. The film then follows the chaotic events that follow the attempt on Hitler's life and showcase the role of von Stauffenberg, who is today considered one of Germany's national heroes. Valkyrie stars Tom Cruise as Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, Kenneth Branagh as General von Tresckow, Bill Nighy as General Obrecht, Terence Stamp as General Beck, and many others. The film was directed by Bryan Singer, produced by Christopher McQuarrie, Singer, and Gilbert Adler. Valkyrie was a modest critical success and a financial success. Now, we talked at length in the main episode about how the German war effort would have been changed or not at all if the assassins would have succeeded in their attempt on July 20th. And just to recap, I believe it was a consensus that nothing would have changed. We discussed that the Germans theoretically would have sued for peace with the Western Allies and demanded that they hold on to territorial gains made prior to the invasion of the Soviet Union, and that they would have wanted to continue their war with the communists in the East. Now, while the conspirators would have liked to imagine that an action like that may have occurred, the reality is that there would have been absolutely no way in which the Allies would have negotiated with Germany, with or without Hitler. Alexandra Ritchie made it abundantly clear that the Allies wanted to render Germany essentially powerless to prevent any further war from starting in Europe again due to German aggression. There would have been no negotiations whatsoever. So does that beg the question of whether or not the assassination attempt was useless? You could argue that had Hitler been killed, the new government would have tried to make demands, been denied, and would have bowed to the will of the Allies regardless of territorial plans. At least one would have hoped that's how it would have been played out. But can you imagine the lives that would have been saved had that happened? It's hard to fathom, really. And while the July 20th plot receives the lion's share of attention when it comes to the assassination attempts on Hitler, as we said in the main episode, it certainly wasn't the only attempt made on his life, not by a long shot. Roughly 15 attempts were made on Hitler's life by conspirators. There's a very rough guess at 22, but many of the supposed, quote, plans, unquote, were never really plans at all. They were merely rumors and post-war boasting, in my opinion. However, there was one assassination attempt that very nearly succeeded. This occurred in 1943, and honestly, this one would have had farther-reaching effects and probably would have worked better in Germany's favor, and I'll discuss why in a minute. Back to the plot. German General Henning von Tresckow, played by Kenneth Branagh in the film, had been a conspirator and polled his support for Hitler since 1934, supposedly. From what I was able to discover on von Tresckow, he grew disillusioned with the Nazis and Hitler after the Night of the Long Knives, when several SA members were murdered by the SS without trial. His reaction to Kristallnacht, the state-sanctioned pogrom against Jews in 1934, apparently sealed the deal. In 1939, von Tresckow told another fellow officer, quote, "Both duty and honor demand from us that we should do our best to bring about the downfall of Hitler and National Socialism, to save Germany and Europe from barbarism," end quote. And while he had the desire in 1939 to get rid of Hitler, he did not have the means with which to get the deed done. Further barbarous acts committed by the Germans and the Soviet Union against Jews further pushed von Tresckow into a corner. Despite his lack of support for Hitler's regime, von Tresckow simply did not have the power, or the support, mind you, to get anything done, at least until 1943, as I said earlier. The exact date was March 13th, 1943. A time bomb was to be smuggled on Hitler's plane following a visit to Army Group Center in the Soviet Union. The bomb was adapted from a British plastic explosive which had been seized by the Abwehr. The Abwehr was a German intelligence agency, from captured British SOE agents. The pencil detonator consisted of a thin copper tube containing acid that would take about 10 minutes to silently eat through a wire holding back the spring-loaded firing pin from the percussion cap that would have ignited the bomb. The mechanism provided a time delay for detonation. This would have given the airplane time to get in the air, get high enough in the air that if something would have happened, there would have been absolutely no way for the airplane to have landed. The bomb was disguised as a box supposedly containing 2 bottles of Cointreau. Tresckow was acquainted with Lieutenant Colonel Heinz Brandt, an officer on Hitler's staff who traveled on Hitler's plane. Tresckow asked Brandt to take the parcel with him to Germany for delivery to Tresckow's friend, General Helmut Steiff. Tresckow claimed the liquor was the payoff for a bet he'd lost to Steiff. Tresckow's aide carried the parcel to the airfield. As Hitler and his entourage prepared to board his plane, the aide secretly activated the detonator with a pair of pliers, then reclosed the parcel and handed it to Brandt as he boarded the plane. The bomb was expected to explode about half an hour later, with the plane near Minsk, close enough to the front for the plane's loss to be attributed to Soviet fighters. When the crash and Hitler's death were reported, or were going to be reported, General Obrecht in Berlin would use the army to seize control in Berlin, Vienna, and Munich. Unfortunately, the bomb did not go off as planned. Didn't go off at all, actually. The air inside the plane was too cold for the detonator to go off, thus rendering the bomb impotent. I said earlier that this attack would have been more favorable to Germany. Why? Well, for several reasons, not the least of which was the fact that the Western Allies had not yet landed in Normandy. Germany may have held more of a bargaining chip in 1943 than they ever could have in 1944. Certainly, earlier would have proved much more favorable than later. When the July 20th plot failed, von Tresckow knew that he would be implicated, and to thus save some of his fellow conspirators, decided to commit suicide in a forest near Bialystok on July 21st. His parting words to his aide were, and I quote, "The whole world will vilify us now, but I am still totally convinced that we did the right thing. Hitler is the archenemy not only of Germany, but of the world. When in a few hours' time I go before God to account for what I have done and left undone, I know I will be able to justify what I did in the struggle against Hitler. God promised Abraham that he would not destroy Sodom if only 10 righteous men could be found in the city. And so I hope for our sake God will not destroy Germany. No one among us can complain about dying, for whoever joined our ranks put on the shirt of Nessus. A man's moral worth is established only at the point where he is ready to give his life in defense of his convictions." End quote. Another character that we see in the film is played by our favorite German officer, Thomas Kretschmann. Kretschmann plays Otto Ernst Raymer in Valkyrie. Raymer lived a very controversial post-war life, which I will get to in a moment. But before he did that, he joined the German army a few months before Hitler ever came to power. And soon after Hitler came to power, Raymer relished the new leader's ideals and plans. In 1939, Raymer was amongst those who invaded Poland. He served in the Balkans campaign and eventually the campaign in the Soviet Union. In 1942, he was transferred to the elite Grossdeutschland Division, and in 1943, his unit held open the route of retreat for the Waffen-SS evacuating Kharkov. He was awarded the Knight's Cross for bravery and eventually the Oak Leaves to the Knight's Cross awarded by Hitler personally. In March 1944, Raymer was appointed as CEO of Wachtbataillon Grossdeutschland, stationed in Berlin, and as the film shows, was the man responsible for carrying out Valkyrie in the event of a coup d'etat. Late on July 20th, von Stauffenberg arrived back in Berlin, and believing that he had succeeded in killing Hitler, issued orders to Raymer to arrest several senior Nazi government officials, claiming that they were part of a coup. Upon being ordered by General Paul von Hase to arrest Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels, Raymer went to Goebbels' office to do so. However, on arrival, Raymer was met by Goebbels' protestations that Hitler was still alive and had issued counter-orders to those Raymer was enforcing. When Raymer asked for proof, Goebbels picked up the phone and asked to be put through to Hitler at the Wolf's Lair, then handed him the telephone receiver, upon which Raymer heard Hitler's voice, ordering him to crush the plot in Berlin with the troops under his command. Raymer then realized that he'd been taking orders from the conspirators, and he returned with his troops to the Berlin military headquarters, Bendler Block, arrested the conspirators, including von Stauffenberg. For his role in suppressing the rebellion, Raymer was promoted 2 ranks to colonel. Shortly thereafter, Raymer is shown in a German newsreel reviewing troops of the Wacht Battalion, where he gives this speech, and I quote, "We are here today as soldiers, political soldiers, with a political and moral duty. It is our duty to secure Lebensraum, defend the fatherland, and uphold our National Socialist ideals, and we shall continue to do our duty until our final victory." End quote. For the remainder of the war, Raymer served in combat in East Prussia and then the Ardennes, where he was captured by American forces and remained a POW until 1947. After the war, however, things with Raymer get interesting. He set up a political organization entitled the Socialist Reich Party. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? In 1950, which was promptly banned in 1952 for making inflammatory political statements, but not before it had gathered, get this, 360,000 supporters in Lower Saxony and Schleswig-Holstein, and won 16 seats in the state parliament. Clearly, the feelings for Nazi Germany were still there in 1952. He became an outspoken Holocaust denier, saying that the gas chambers were built by the United States, in Poland, of course, and that the footage of the stacks of corpses was a trumped-up movie made by Hollywood Jews. Sounds like a nice guy. With his party banned in Germany, naturally, he fled, first going to Egypt and later Syria, where he dealt with in the illegal arms trade. He returned to Germany in the 1980s and again got involved in neo-Nazi politics with an organization called the German Freedom Movement. This movement advocated the reunification of Germany and the abolishment of NATO and their expulsion from German soil. From 1991 to 1994, he published a neo-Nazi paper containing his political beliefs and philosophy. He was brought to trial and accused of inciting racial hatred, convicted and sentenced to 22 months in prison. In 1994, he fled Germany again, this time to Spain, where he lived openly, having the full support of the Spanish government, who refused to extradite him to Germany for his prison sentence. While in Spain, he continued to question the historical veracity of the Holocaust, and I laugh because this is asinine, and attempted to revive his old political party in Germany. Raymer died in Spain in 1997 at the age of 85. After having discussed such a reprobate like Raymer, I will leave you with this quote from von Tresckow from June of 1944. And it goes like this, quote, "It is almost certain that we will fail. But how will future history judge the German people if not even a handful of men had the courage to put an end to that criminal?" End quote. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to tune in next week when we discussed an often forgotten World War II classic, Hell is for Heroes, starring Steve McQueen. Until then, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Service on Celluloid. Be sure to rate and review us on Stitcher and iTunes if you'd like what you hear. I'd like to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, our producer Tessa Jager, and our sound engineer Jeremy Burson. This has been a production of the National World War II Museum.